Hi guys, this is Emily Caron. I am a sports business reporter at Sportico, and this is Sportico Teaches, NCAA Changes. Who runs college sports? That is a great question. The NCAA has been the governing body of college sports for a long time now, actually since 1906. Its job is essentially to regulate college sports, create and enforce rules, and ensure fairness, all while keeping athletes' well-being top of mind. One of the other big things that they do is distribute revenue from big money-making events like March Madness, which it runs, along with a number of other postseason championships and those kinds of things. And all that money gets distributed and dispersed among its member conferences and then trickles down to schools. Short answer is there are several, which has brought the NCAA to its current inflection point and is why things are probably going to change pretty substantially this year. The first issue is that the NCAA is a massive organization overseeing more than 500,000 college athletes across all three divisions, and that's over 1,200 member schools. That means it's regulating Division I schools with budgets of $200 million like the Ohio States or Alabamas of the world, all the way down to Division III schools who don't even offer athletic scholarships. So there's a lot of variables at play, and all these conferences and divisions have different factors to consider, different rules they need to enforce, and things they need to focus on, which makes it very tricky. There is a three-division governance structure, so D1, D2, and D3 do have their own sets of rules and regulations, but even making rules within one division, like D1, where you still have vastly different economics at the biggest versus the smallest schools and between conferences, is hard. The financial gaps can literally still be in the tens of millions of dollars within one single division. Another issue has been that the NCAA is criticized as being slow to respond to change. NIL is a great recent example. It wasn't until states took matters into their own hands that and started passing their own legislation that forced the NCAA to react, despite them creating a bunch of committees and proactively starting making recommendations for new rules, all of that stuff, but they never ultimately passed it. They didn't actually react until the states started forcing them to. Then there are issues with enforcement. Investigations into rules violations can take years to be completed. Sometimes punishments are handed down inconsistently, but also after, long after some of the people and often all of the people involved are already gone, which makes it hard for some schools to swallow. And speeding that process up has definitely been a priority for people for a long time. There have also been issues of equity, as a lot of you, I'm sure, probably saw with the men's and women's basketball tournaments this past year. The NCAA runs all of those postseason tournaments, as I mentioned earlier, except for when it comes to D1 football. The way that they've approached that, the different tactics they've taken, the different accommodations made have also kind of highlighted a lot of problematic assumptions and operations within the NCAA. And then, of course, people have taken issue with the way the organization has defended what a lot of people see as a really antiquated model of amateurism. That hasn't changed, despite the fact that college sports have. College sports over the last decade or two in particular have turned into a legitimate big business, like we said earlier, generating sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. And things like TV contracts are bringing in substantial amounts of money, on par with a lot of professional sports leagues. Expenses and coaching salaries continue to climb, but players are still relatively limited in the financial support and aid that they can receive. Obviously, NIL has changed a little bit of that, but not enough to satisfy a lot of people out there. So that has been a key issue. And then there's everything that happened with the Supreme Court this past summer. The Supreme Court handed down a pretty decisive decision. They ruled unanimously against the NCAA in the Alston case, which you can read all about on Sportico if you're interested in diving into that more. This case centered around financial aid limitations, but it ended up evolving into a lot more than that, to say the least. The court, in its final decision, basically broadly rebuked the long defended concept of amateurism and brought a lot of things into play, which is what prompted the NCAA to sort of reevaluate its stance. That was a mouthful, I know. Basically, there are a lot of criticisms of the NCAA, its methods, priorities, its structure, you name it, and that is why we are where we are today. The NCAA has adopted some new changes over the last few years. Most of them are on the smaller side. Some have been a little bit bigger, like granting autonomy to the 5 biggest and wealthiest conferences in D1. That's what we probably call the Power 5 is probably something you've heard of, but they are the autonomy conferences. That's the ACC, the Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, and SEC. They were granted that status in 2015. Basically, they were given the power to create some of their own sets of rules, particularly around financial benefits they offer to their athletes. But since then, not a ton has changed until now. The Alston ruling really forced the NCAA to reconsider its position in all of this and take a step back. The governing body then commissioned a committee, it loves committees, to redraft its constitution. After a few drafts and some back and forth this fall, final recommendations were unanimously accepted at the end of 2021 by the Board of Governors, which is bringing the NCAA one step closer to actually implementing a brand new constitution to govern college sports. The NCAA, the entire membership, will vote January 20th, so at the end of this month at the 2022 convention. If the constitution is formally adopted, which people expect that it will be, each of the 3 divisions will then start working on making their own new rules, as long as they fit within this kind of broader NCAA framework. So that's going to be where the real change is going to happen. They'll have to kind of hash out what they want to do. Like I said, even within each conference and each division, there are differences among member institutions. So I'm sure that process will take a lot of back and forth and negotiation, but that's probably where we'll see the most substantial changes. And then once all of that is all ready, the new constitution would be effective August 1st. The gist of it is revenue allocations and championships would remain the same, but then each league will have oversight of its own budget, its own expenses, and then how all that money is distributed and trickled down to its members. It was a long road to get here. It was kind of a crazy year in college sports between the Alston ruling, NIL going into effect, and everything that we've seen tied to those 2 things. But this should be coming to a conclusion where there actually is substantive change, which I think people are very much ready to see. Thanks for joining, guys. This has been Sportico Teaches, NCAA Changes. You guys can continue following along with some of the stuff on Sportico, and you can subscribe here.